Good evening, everybody.
Evening.
Sal and I have a friend. We brought Magdalene Jean-Baptiste along with us. Some people call her Maggie. I call her Magdalene because I think it's a beautiful name.
Well, thank you very much.
So tonight, the plan is what I'm hoping to accomplish, but we'll adjust as we go. I'm hoping to get through 11 chapters of Job. We're not going to go into great detail over every chapter, but we're going to hit some main points and major themes. You need help?
Yes.
What do you need help with?
No.
Will you please ask mommy for help?
Okay.
Thank you, son. So tonight the plan. So what was I saying? So we're going to try to hit 11 chapters, and the reason for 11 chapters is because that will bring us to the end of this section, and we'll start dealing with another section. And once we finish with this section and start working on the next section, we're going to develop a bunch of momentum. And we'll be able to kind of wrap this up and see what I was talking about in the beginning. One of my fears is that we'll kind of get lost in the forest by like spending too much time in the text, which is something I don't like the sound of. Like, how can you spend too much time in the Bible? But I want to bring the point about so that y'all know, stay interested, actually. So, hey, Lynn.
Hi.
What's up, Lynn?
I survived the first day of school, people.
Nice.
Whew. I'm late because I had to go get first day of school ice cream because
it's important.
Is that a thing? Because I don't even go to school, but I need first day of school ice cream as well.
Girl, yes. It's a thing. Just go get some.
Maggie needs first day of school egg rolls, Vietnamese egg rolls.
Ooh.
Oh my God.
I could do that too.
That's Maggie's thing. When I want to make Maggie happy, there's some egg rolls.
Yeah, I could go for those too.
All right, so I'm hoping to cover 11 chapters starting at verse 20, bringing us to chapter 31. And I think we can do this, but if we can't, that's okay. We'll get as far as we can go and hopefully have some lively conversation along the way. So as always, you guys, if you have questions or if I'm moving too fast or if I'm not making sense, you got to stop me because sometimes I don't know my own limits, I guess. And I just start talking. So I'm going to just start summarizing, and I'm not going to read very much of the text because you all of this audience is smart and capable, and you can read. There might be pieces that I read just to kind of make the point, but I'm going to kind of summarize. And you guys can go back and check me or send me questions or, bring an argument against maybe what I'm saying if you think that I'm not bringing this out correctly. But in chapter 20, I think we get introduced to a brand new, to a new theme from what we've been talking about. And I perceive that for 11 chapters, we don't veer very far from this theme. We kind of keep adding to it and learning about it and arguing it and wrestling it out. But that seems to be at least part of the project of the next 11 chapters is dealing with this theme that I'm just about to name. But before I name the theme, I want to point out that in verse 2, Zophar comes in and he starts making an argument. And what he does in verse 2 is he just makes this about him. See, this whole time up to this point, they're arguing about how Job is guilty or what role Job has in this and what his culpability is that would bring upon him all the suffering. And at this point, I think unwittingly, Zophar kind of he accidentally shows their true colors. He kind of accidentally shows his cards and makes this about himself. See, this whole time, really, the council that was coming to comfort Job was really projecting their own stuff onto Job. Their own fears, their own insecurities, their own apprehensions, their own misunderstandings, their own superstitions. They imposed on Job and made it his responsibility with eloquent, verbose, beautiful, flourishing language to make it sound beautiful and pretty and official and important and big and not about them, but really it was about them. And in verse 3, I said too earlier, Zophar comes out and he really just kind of shows that he's making this about him. And what he starts talking about and what he starts bringing to the table is he kind of categorizes Job as a have, and he's making the claim that this all happened to Job because Job having didn't do enough for the have-nots. And because Job had and didn't do enough for the have-nots, so the line of logic goes, God is punishing him. So Zophar does a couple of big things that are messed up. By insisting that Job is a have, and he has mistreated the have-nots, and he's being punished, or the scales are being balanced. The question goes, who does the balancing of the scales? Well, God. So what have we reduced God to? We've reduced God to karma. And again, just like I said in previous weeks, I don't mean karma in a technical sense. I mean like the way we throw that term around in our society. We assume that there's something that is balancing scales. If I'm a good person, good things are going to happen. If I'm a bad person, bad things are going to happen. And so that sense of karma, Zophar goes, and not intentionally, but this is what we do when we impose our own stuff into the situation, onto the person who's mourning, onto the person who's hurt, and onto God. We bring reduction to God. So Zophar's God, as far as his argument goes, ends up becoming just karma. And God's not going to be okay with that because he's very much more than karma. You can especially see this in like verses 14 through 19. So moving forward, that's kind of chapter 20. This idea of karma gets introduced. In 21, it goes a little bit further. The haves and the have-nots are all subject to the same. So Job starts making an argument that if the haves and the have-nots are all subject to the same system of fortune or luck or random picks, then how can this be his problem? So Job kind of is saying, assuming I'm a have and there are have-nots, why would even karma want to balance the scales? Like, I didn't ask to be a have, or it's not my fault that I'm a have. It's a stroke of the luck. It's a stroke of luck, or it's a stroke of God's capriciousness that I'm a have and that somebody else is a have-not. That I was made a have happened against my will just as much as being a have-not was something against the have-not's will. So how should the scales be balanced more in their favor for something that we both fall victim to? It looks to you like the grass is greener on my side, but we're both just victims of a system of either randomness or God or whatever you want, but the sun still shines on both our heads the same way. I didn't choose to be a have. I didn't choose that category, but since I have it, I'm not going to regret it. I'm going to work it. And then he goes on kind of with his argument. Besides, what a man has or doesn't have is between the true distributor, the great distributor, and him, and is no one else's business. So if benevolent God chose me to be a have, that's between me and God. That's not your issue, Zophar. Take it up to God. Why are you putting that on me? Kind of like the first argument, it's not my fault. I didn't choose it. Why are you holding me accountable for the same way I'm a victim as you are? It looks more desirable to have, and perhaps it is. But you take that up with the person who put me in this condition. Don't put it on me like it's my problem. That's kind of Job's argument. And so he continues. And he makes a further argument that prospering does not have an obvious correlation to God's favor. But even if it did, if it is a part of his inexplicable, unfair favor, why would he retract it? So like, if God blessed me, and if he created a system that wasn't fair, and he made me a have, and he made you a have-not, what makes you think that he's the kind of karma who's just going to balance the scales? If he chose for me to be a have, why wouldn't he stand behind that decision and keep me a have? Why are you putting on me that God has made me a have and is taking it away from me because I didn't do enough for the have-nots? You're assuming a lot about God and his balance system. It doesn't explain, like, if that's the case, then it's incredibly unfair that he set me up to be a have and then just took it away. There's no fairness to that. That's not a balancing of the scales. That's a victimization of what he set me up with. It doesn't make you better. He took away from me, and now I don't have, and you still don't have. Neither of us are better, and that there's no explanation about, like, that doesn't jive well with balancing. Nothing was balanced. Now we just both are in a bad situation, and what there was in terms of having is poof, gone, and nobody benefits. Do you have some thoughts there, Lynn? It looks like your mind is thinking.
No, I'm just listening intently.
Does anybody else want to jump in with anything?
Do you think like it would be a legitimate argument to be like, well, you were uncharitable, you're being Scrooge, God gave you a lot of wealth and blessed you, and you're supposed to carry blessings out into the world, but you're hoarding it and being a Scrooge. And like, is Joe defending himself on that front, just being like, no, I'm a stand-up dude, I did my best.
Yeah, so you're basically saying what I am reading Zophar to be saying. And Job is making some really interesting arguments, because the intuitive argument would be like, I am too charitable. I am too. That's not his argument.
With the tone and everything.
Right. Can you tell I have kids?
Yeah.
Especially daughters.
He's making more ingenious arguments than that. Job is coming back and saying, like, you basically are claiming this isn't fair, but for God to right the fairness, A, he has not done that by making me suffer, and B, that doesn't make any sense. Immediately, it sounds like, I didn't get any, he has a lot. If God were fair, if God were just, then he would give me too, and he would take away from Job, especially because Job wasn't charitable, and he would punish him. But Job, he's making a strong argument. There is no such thing as fair. Now, this is tough to follow for a second because it rubs our emotions wrong. But if Job is expected to be charitable to those who don't have, then what does a have-not have in responsibility to make Job better? See, if there's a balancing scale, then it would seem like if Job has everything but doesn't have a relationship with God because he has too much wealth that gets in the way, think of like the rich young ruler if you're familiar with that text, then like, would it be easier for the have-not to get close to God? And what is the have-not going to do to bring Job closer to God? Like, isn't there a buy-in on both ends? I mean, if this is really fair, then let's bring it all the way down to who has in every category, and let's make a reconciliation. But it doesn't seem like that's what God has done, because I had, now I don't have, and now we both don't have, and nothing was made better. So it doesn't seem to be about fairness, and it's a pretty good argument. Furthermore, what would be more persuasive is if Zophar quoted scripture. If he just said, God has spoken and said that you must act this way, and this way, or your wealth will be taken. But the interesting thing is that for all of these arguments, it's all speculation. They're not basing it on how God self-identified or the rules that God revealed. They're basing it on how they think the world should run. And God is going to surprise them, because the world does not run how they think it should. And if the world ran how they think it should, everybody would get screwed in the end. Did that address your
It does.
comment?
It brings kind of another question, though.
Yep.
Just like, and I think, and we've kind of probably already covered this a little bit, but like, how familiar would Job be? And I know this is like, it's not very precise when the story is or where it is, but yeah, like if we're doing it in the Bible timeline, it's obviously post Adam, post Adam and Eve. But do we have any other like hints or breadcrumbs in this story where we can place it and say like, well, this hasn't happened yet? I mean, obviously it's pre-Jesus.
Yeah, so different scholars comb the text for those hints, and they land in different places, and there's no consensus, and I'm not persuaded one or the other, except I believe at this point in my understanding that it's a very early text. But the question, to like kind of flesh out what you're saying and taking it to the next step, could be like, well, was the law even revealed to them? So is it reasonable to require them or ask of them to predicate their ideas on the law? And the answer technically is no. But my stance is that all they're doing is speculating.
Yeah.
Like, perhaps the law has not been revealed to them. Although Adam and Eve, interestingly, knew what their boundaries were. It would seem like for people to have a stance and a belief in God, it should be based on something. And what's interesting about this text is that the friends just conceptualize God and conceptualize Job's guilt on the arbitrariness of their personal belief systems. It's not based on in any foreseeable way. I mean, you can see fingerprints of their culture and fingerprints of cultic practices, but they're not citing anything that is reliable to any of them. It's all speculation. So it's not even like in today's day and age, in the area of COVID, and I'm not getting political here, but I'm just trying to reach to something that we can that's fresh in our minds. Everybody talks about like wearing masks and the science behind it or not behind it. The science. So while everybody's imposing their ideas, like some people think that mask wearing is good and some think that it's bad, everybody's still citing science. They're not citing like what seems right to me only. Maybe they're using science or to they're using the statistics they want to support their viewpoint, but they're still using statistics. Like, these guys are just using open reason. They're not appealing to like a solid canon of belief. They're just arbitrarily like stating how they think things should go. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah. No, that definitely answers my question too, of just like how much of exposure to, the Israelite traditions we would expect them to have. And I guess it doesn't really have much bearing on the story, really.
Right. And it just, the friends would be in a better place to say, I have no clue what's going on and I love you and I'm going to sit here and cry with you.
I know, it is funny too that this is all in the context of him just having like lost his children. They're just, yeah. Well, it's because you had shit and you didn't share it. It's like, whoa.
Well, I actually think it's kind of true to real life. I remember distinctly when my boyfriend died when I was 18, people said all kinds of stupid things to me. Like I was only depressed because I wasn't a good enough Christian, or, it must have been his time, so it's okay. Really, no, it's not okay. And I'm allowed to be upset. And what the heck? I just, yeah. This problem that Job's friends have, it really exists in the real world. It's not
Right.
It's not just fiction. It's not just a parable.
That's one of the other things that's enticing about scripture is we hear all the time that the winners, the imperialistic winners are the ones who write history. And what's beautiful about the Bible is Israelites usually aren't winners, and it's their story that gets told. And if they were going to tell a story to make themselves look good or to cast themselves as winners, they wouldn't have been as brutally honest about things as they have been. They've been too close to human nature for like an Egyptian's comfort zone. A pharaoh would never tell the story this way. Just when it happened.
Right.
So that's really enticing about scripture.
I love listening to Dan Carlin's Hardcore History, and he's always talking about like the Assyrian kings had like a court tradition of just how you would describe stuff, and just like the burning of Babylon or something. It's just like, I came in and I destroyed all the cities and I flooded, and it's just it follows a certain like theme for the day. But yeah, I mean, I just think there's definitely, for propaganda, there's traditions and there's a way you do it, and it's not like sharing all the dirty little details.
Yeah, I saw you lick your lips there, Maggie. You got something?
Well, I was gonna say, when things happen to you, one of the things that happen is it reveals to you who really are your friends. Because and if he really knew God, because my favorite thing is the transactional, a lot of people deal with God with transactions. Like you give a tithe, you get a blessing, you come to the church and you pray, and then God is gonna bless you. He's gonna open up a window of heaven and pour out a blessing. And so we put God in a box. And Zophar, the way he's describing God, you can tell he doesn't have a relationship with God.
Mm-hmm.
Because if someone told me that they saw Adam steal a car and beat up an old lady, because I know Adam's character, I would know that that's not Adam. It would be, are you sure you didn't mistake? It wasn't mistaken identity. So right here, his friends are revealing their jealousy and their animosity towards him. And as a matter of fact, I think they're happy that this has happened to him.
Yeah.
Because it took him down a peg. So yeah, you on that high horse, and now you lower than us.
That's actually a perfect segue into the next point. Looking at verses 24 through like 29. In verse 27, he says, look, Job says, look, I know your plans and your violent schemes against me. And so what we start getting from this point where Job starts going is, not only do you think karma should happen, but y'all are revealing to me that you're willing to make it happen.
Yes.
You're willing. It's one thing to demonstrate. It's another thing to go loot somebody's business to get what you want. It's one thing to appeal for justice. It's another thing to go and take. And you're telling me that if I can prove to you that God is not karma, you'll go ahead and fit those shoes. You're willing to go ahead and become that arbiter. It's not even that important to you if God exists or doesn't exist. What's important is that you finally get yours and you have yourself poised and ready to come get yours while I'm here in my weakness. It's so convenient of you to have come to comfort me when I'm vulnerable. Again, in verse 34, he talks about that their answers are nothingness, but they're a betrayal of him.
Yes.
Job is starting to see their true motives there. And I think their motives are that they're poised and ready to take and to get theirs. So that brings us to chapter 22. Eliphaz jumps in and he takes the logic even further. If you had been right with God, this would not have had. So these are my notes that I'm reading. I'm not quoting the text. I'm summarizing what I got out of it. But he's like basically stating the position that if you had been right with God, this would not have happened to you because you would have been a better person. If you were right with God, you would have been more compassionate. If you were right with God, you would have done the right thing. But see, the right thing starts becoming code. It's just like so much of what we're experiencing in our society right now. We have these like, what do they call it? Like virtue signaling. That's almost what Eliphaz is saying. Like, he's almost virtue signaling. Like, wearing a mask isn't about freedom. Again, I'm not making political statements. This is just how people are talking nowadays. Wearing masks isn't about freedom. It's about like how compassionate you are for others and you're willing to protect them. And whether that's true or not, that's not the point of what I'm saying. It turns an issue that would not have otherwise been thought that way into a matter of your virtue. And even if that's valid, that's the transition that's taking place here. So he's almost like virtue signaling here that like, if you were closer to God, you would have done the right thing. And it turns out that the right thing is to give your wealth and make things even and be balanced. Like, God wouldn't have to be karma if you would take it upon yourself and give to the have-nots. Because that's the right thing, and we all know it. Since, however, you did not give your fair share, it will be taken from you. The have-nots will balance the scales. So he's kind of like taking the argument a little bit in a different direction, a little bit further. He's kind of exposing them a little bit more. And he's saying like, maybe we don't even need God. We need you to be right with God. Whoever God is, whatever God is. But we all know that any God worth his weight would make sure that you did the right thing. And since you didn't, it's been taken away from you. And even if there's no God, we'll go ahead and make sure that everything's fair. So verses 19 through 26 are almost like a veiled threat, I think. If you do the right thing, You can be saved from more heartache. It's almost like a mob boss coming by and saying, like, you know, like if the right thing is to pay up once a week and they'll get their protection. It's almost like what's going on here. Like, if you would have paid your dues, maybe we wouldn't have to do this. Maybe we wouldn't root God on. Maybe we would have tried to step in. Maybe we would have supported you more. See, we're cruising. Now we're at the next chapter, 23. You guys want to chime in at all? We're going at a quick pace.
I think you should keep going.
Okay. So in chapter 23, verses 3 through 5, I am going to read these verses. Would that I knew how to find him, that I might come to where he dwells. I would lay out my case before him and would fill my mouth with contentions. I would know the words that he answered me and would grasp what he said to me. What's interesting about this is the tone changes. Job is talking. This sounds a lot like what we've heard before, but it's different, and it's important that it's different. In chapter 13, Job got full of righteous indignation, and he's like, I'm going to state my case before God. I don't care if he smites me. I don't care if he kills me. If he's going to put me under this scrutiny, I'm going to stand up and at least say my piece. He's kind of talking like that now, that you can hear his tone dropping. He's getting a little more humble, and this process is coming around. He's slowly starting to learn, because wrapped up, and if you read from 1 to 7, that whole stanza, I kind of just took the meat out. It sounds like Job is starting to understand that what needs to take place here is that he needs to start tracking God on God's terms. He needs to start hearing God's voice and seeing things from God's perspective. He doesn't know how he's going to do it, but he's starting to see a missing link. Instead of God just out to get me and I'm going to speak my piece, he's like, if I had a shot at stating my cause, at arguing my cause, I have to kind of get in God's head a little bit. Maybe he's seeing things different than I'm seeing them. And so you start hearing this shift for the first time. Job, so I think I've talked about this a little bit, but I'm going to bring this up now. Again, narcissism is about an underdeveloped self. A person who did not properly have proper attachment in early developmental years is probably not going to mature and have an understanding of who he or she is. And everything is on a scale, right? Like nothing is black and white. So to the degree a person hasn't developed, that's the degree to which there's a missing part of who that person is. And so a narcissist has large missing pieces that he fronts with a veneer. Oftentimes it's arrogance. Sometimes it's overperformance. Sometimes it's like trying to prove to you that they're worthwhile or worthy. But it's always this proactive front in place of the substance of self. And we have this shallow kind of a person that Job was. I'm not saying that he was so arrogant like we typically think of with a narcissist, but I'm saying that he was not fully developed. And in order to be fully developed, you have to see your role in things, and you have to see the interactions reasonably of the people around you. And Job is starting to realize that maybe he has more of a role in this, even though he's not going to call it unrighteousness or sin. Maybe he's missing something. Maybe it's not all based on his assumption. And maybe there's another counter perspective that comes from the hand of God. And just maybe God's trying to teach him a lesson. And maybe that's not attached to his worthiness. Maybe it's not attached to his behavior. This is mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing to most people, and it's especially mind-blowing to people who've been in the church, because we typically reduce things to karma. but just maybe there's something more than that. So in chapter 13, oh wait, I'm sorry, I already did that part. So moving forward, starting at verse 8 in chapter 23, and kind of going on through towards the end of the chapter, Job starts discovering something else. And he starts talking about how, like, I'll give you a taste. Look, to the east I go, and he's not there. To the west, and I do not discern him. To the north, where he acts, and behold him not. He veils the south, and I do not see him. So Job is basically saying, like, I search for God in all the right places, but really I'm searching for God in all the wrong places. He's like, everywhere we think of to go to find him. I know you know that country song, Maggie.
Oh, I know that one too. That's sad. Oh, I'm embarrassed.
Fun fact, Magdalene loves country music.
Yep.
Not all of it, just a little bit. So Job is basically saying that he has searched for God in all the places he knows to look. In all the places the universal person knows to look. In all the places we intuitively know to go to find God, and he ain't there. The answer isn't there. Specifically for Job, we know that he looked for God in offerings and sacrifice, and that's not where God was. And that's not where God has self-identified. And that's not where God hangs out. That's not what God wants to be known for. Not altogether. But what he discovers, starting at like verse 15, is he is found in the place of fear and humility. So in Ecclesiastes, we've talked about this a little bit too, and in Ecclesiastes, where every idea is laid out about the purpose for man's existence, for humankind's existence, the writer of Ecclesiastes says over and over, for every idea that comes up, for a candidate for our purpose for existence, he shoots it down and says, that's vanity of vanities. It's absurdity. It's meaningless. That idea is no better than any other idea, until at the end he says, all has been said and all has been heard. The whole duty of man is to fear God and to keep his commandments. Now, in our 21st century American culture, we don't like to hear the idea of fear as being something healthy. But this idea of fear needs a little bit of explanation. The idea, number one, is this intense reverence for God. It's not just I'm afraid or I'm scared. It's like God is other and holy and I am not. And because of that, I see my inadequacy and it is wholly daunting. So there's that aspect of it. The other aspect is related to that idea, and it's this. The fear that is developed, because these aren't the only two places it's talked about, but this fear that's developed as a theme through Scripture, which is known as the beginning of wisdom in other places, is about humility. Because God is holy and he's other in character, and I am not, and I am inadequate, and he is wholly adequate, I know that I can't be right. I know that I'm missing information. I know that my way is not enough. There's more information outside there than what I just come up with inside here. This is a humbling realization. And the next step of this humility, how we act on this fear / humility, is we get to a place where we're willing to let go of our way of doing things and take on God's way. And the next part of the verse is to fear God and keep his commandments. And we'll find out by Jesus, through Jesus later on in the New Testament, that the whole law that's being talked about, the Torah that's being talked about, the fulfillment of it all is to love the Lord your God with everything you are and to love your neighbor as yourself, to come outside of self in relationship. So to fear God brings us to humility, which makes us let go of our self-centered way and take on God as center point in his way. And what that equates to is coming outside of self in relationship to God, to being right with myself and my neighbor. And Job is starting in verses 15 through 17 and beyond to start getting an inkling, hey, there's more to this besides my wealth, besides being like the cool guy who has the money, the cars, the hot babes. And also, it's more than being the guy who has resource and upholds society with charitable giving and makes sure that everything's running well. It's more than me. It's more than the lack of who I am. I'm discovering that everything I thought was me was a front. And there's got to be more. And that more is discovered in relationship. That brings us to chapter 24. Should I keep going or you guys have something?
Keep going.
Yeah, I mean, I
What'd you say?
summary, so.
And what did you say, Lynn?
I said you're on a roll, clearly.
Oh, okay. All right. So chapter 24. We start discovering that it is not a more noble thing to be a have-not who is not prepared and thus vulnerable and not someone else's responsibility. So what Job is starting to say is, he's like, you're over here accusing me of being a have-not, or of being a have, and that you're a have-not, or that there's a whole sector of society that's a have-not, and that I'm supposed to be responsible. But check this out, have-nots. Perhaps I have because I am righteous. Perhaps I have because I planned well. Perhaps you don't have because you did not plan well. While I was over there and I was doing the uncomfortable thing of saving up and investing and using self-discipline, you did not harness yourself with self-discipline. And now the time has come for me to bear fruit, and the time has come for you to bear fruit, but you did nothing to bear fruit, and so you haven't, and now that's my problem? How is that fair? So that's Job's first kind of argument to this two-part argument. And then he comes in and he furthers it with, second problem with you being a have-not, you think you're so noble because you got a bad shot at life. You think you're so noble because you don't have and I have, and I'm the big bad, like, what's the word that we use now? Like, privileged individual.
Oh, God.
And you are so underprivileged. Well, perhaps your underprivilege is a part of you not being responsible. And then,
Wait. Stop there. Did you hear how that sounded?
I think so, but tell me.
No, I mean, I'm talking to Sal and Maggie. Did you hear how that sounded? You're not privileged because you are irresponsible. What does that sound like?
Pull yourself up by your bootstrap, Jack.
Okay, but it sounds different to a person of color, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It really does. It sounds really offensive, doesn't it? So this rhetorical device is really, really powerful. None of us chose to grow up in poverty. None of us chose to grow up with childhood trauma. None of us, so he's showing how ridiculous his friends' arguments are by turning them inside out. And especially today, with our very relevant example of who is privileged and who is not, you can see just how totally offensive the friend statements are in the first place. That our station and situation in life is what it is. It's not a punishment from God. And it's not because you don't work hard enough or fill in any other offensive, horrible thing we've all heard at one point or another. So God, this is really fascinating how relevant this text is with this example.
Right.
I'm really having a good time with it.
Lynn brings up a point, or she inspires in me something that I need to very much clarify. Job isn't necessarily saying that this is truth, and this isn't necessarily the end of the story or the end of the revealed truth. We haven't necessarily gotten to the goalpost yet.
Right.
Job is undoing the argument on the same terms that they made the argument. He's throwing back at them what they threw at him.
And this is
go ahead.
This is a formula,
right,
in rhetoric that his audience, his contemporary audience, would recognize. And it just struck me that with your example, it's really, really powerful, because nobody in their right mind would make an argument like that today.
Right.
Because if you hear it, you're like, whoa, what was that? That is just so awful.
I think this is offensive to them too.
Well, it is.
They're sick because they're calling him a have. Well, he's on the brink of death.
Right? With
so
nothing.
Everybody who claims that somebody is a have, like, really is a little bit of a sicko.
Right?
Like, we're all screwed. We all need compassion, and we all need to sit with each other with understanding and empathy.
Instead of judgment.
Anybody who has the gall to point at anybody else needs to really apply some consistency and make sure that they're not being hypocritical. But that doesn't mean that Job is altogether correct either. He's doing an intellectual exercise over the argument that they brought forth. And the next point to the argument is, you think you're so noble with your have-noting, but that just means that you're a taker. Are you comfortable just being a taker? And he drops the mic. And then we move on. Job thinks, he's convinced at this point, but this isn't the end of the story, so don't be a hater. Job thinks that having not is a matter of irresponsibility and thusly is deserved. He turns it around. You didn't have because you weren't responsible, you weren't disciplined, so perhaps karma's dealing with you. Bildad, Zophar, whatever y'all's names are. So now we have chapter 25. I'm going to just I'm skimming past 25 and 26. 26 is very short. It's like long. And 25 is relatively short. And it's this very beautiful poetry. The scholars kind of argue as to why they're there and think that those chapters are kind of incomplete. Like, some of it has been lost to history, like if the page fell out of the book, basically. It doesn't bring much to our discussion. You can read it on your own. And there is stuff to glean there. Like, if we took our time, we could go line by line and spend a year or more just going line by line and gleaning this for the richness of the messages it has. I'm picking a vein of thought to carry us through so you can kind of see how ways in which scripture can be read for cohesiveness. But this isn't everything Job has to say. I have some bigger points that I want to make it about Job by the time we're done working on Job. But to get there, we've got to get a taste for it. So I'm just whetting your appetite. So that brings us to chapter 27. And we start coming up with more, we're sounding more like Ecclesiastes here. In verse 8, and Zophar, the Naamathite, spoke up and he said, "For what hope has the tainted to profit when God takes away his life? Will God hear his scream when disaster befalls him?" So what's going on here is there's a breakdown in the belief of God. It turns out there's more to be said here, and that chapter represents more than this idea. But the thing that struck me is God is God to them only as much as it's expedient for God to be God to them. I'm going to use a term that's like racy, but For them, God is almost a masturbatory thing. He just might not even be real. He is something that I can appeal to judge you and to get mine. But Zophar lets the cat out of the bag. Like, at the end of the day, whether I'm blessed or not blessed, whether I'm a have or have not, whether God is real or isn't, we each die, and that's the end. It's over, game over. So what's all this all about anyways? Because what is God if that's it? We just do our thing. We can speculate about who's right and who's wrong. All of us will die. And that's the end of it. God doesn't hear us after that point. And he reveals his true colors. Believing in God is just a matter of expedience for him. And too many of us do that too much. We reduce him to Santa Claus or to somebody that I can appeal to make you look bad and make me look good and to get my way, to set my agenda. God doesn't like that a whole lot, just letting you know. So that brings us to where are we? Chapter 29?
Yep.
Yeah.
Technology and natural resources are not the answer and cannot land at meaning or an understanding of God or his intent. And so we hear, this is a big, long poem that's kind of out of place a little bit. But it almost has to be thrown in. It's almost like it doesn't have to be attached to the three friends or Job. It's like the writer / God knows that this piece has to be like woven in there because it's important. It's another thing that we try to figure out. It doesn't really speak to Job's suffering per se, but part of this project of this section is to write all of the misconceptions. And one of the key misconception players is, if I sow fig leaves around my private parts, I'm not going to be vulnerable. I'm taking us back to the first 3 chapters of Genesis. If I make myself clean, I'm clean. If I create, if I build, if I make,
Mm-hmm.
if I build temples, if I build monuments, if I make myself better, if I self-help, if I become my best, if I use technology, if now I have Google, now I have more books because of technology, I can figure this out, I can do this. And chapter 28 is persuasive in saying, so what? Your technology and your machinations and your efforts does not bring about meaning. You're just kind of changing it's like on Sesame Street when they had a bunch of blocks out. I remember back, a long time ago, I don't know what it's like now, but they would put like 5 blocks out and they would stack them up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They would put them out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They would make a pyramid. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No matter how we arrange these, it's still always 5. And like for chapter 28, you can do whatever you want and you can add whatever kind of technology and you can hope in man's ingenuity, but it does not add meaning. You still just have 5. But wisdom, where is it found? Job starts saying in verse 12 and in verse 20, and wisdom, from where does it come? And where is the place of insight? It's not from our discovery. It's not from our, how would we say it in the West? Like our, I don't know, cowboy, like we can go out with our rugged individualism and that ain't where it is. We can start Space Force and land on the moon or on the planet Pluto if it is a planet, and that ain't where meaning is. So that brings us to chapter 29. So the first whole section, I'll read my notes. Unlike the party guy, Job revisits his wealth and sees it, his past identity. Can't read my handwriting. So, but basically he saw himself at one point in the text as like the guy everybody liked because he was the cool guy. He had the money, he had the wealth, he had the party goods. He, like, his sons and daughters were partying with his money. He had all the hot chicks. He had all the, in our day, he would have had all the cool cars. He would have had all the good toys. He would have had the cool pad that everybody wants to go to. But as soon as that money and wealth is gone, it's gone. And he realized back then in the chapters that we've already discussed that was empty. And he kind of revisits that. But he's doing it with a new reflection. And I've already kind of hinted at this before. And that's part of how I know that I'm onto some reasonable themes, because all of these ideas through this section kind of are interwoven and overlap. But so he concedes the point that he's not the cool guy, and that was a shallow identity. But he's starting to realize that he's no longer the cool guy that everybody wants to be around because he's essential, because he's important, because he's royal, because he's the guy that you have to have around because he has the resources. See, it's one thing to be the hip party guy. It's one thing to be the guy who has all the fun toys. It's another thing to be the guy who with money is the essential guy, the Batman, the politician who's essential, the CEO who the company will fall apart unless he like answers that phone call loudly and annoyingly in the middle of the restaurant or movie. But he realizes that he was both of those characters. He's still just a narcissist because that's empty. And when that money's gone, he's not that guy. That brings us to chapter 30. Job finds a new level of humility where he begins to understand that he is not royal. He is not the royalty that he put value in, and that all he fronted for identity really does lack meaning or true value or ontological being. He is not be. That word become should be spelled capital B, capital E, lowercase C-O-M-E. He has not become. Brings us to chapter 31. I told you we could do this. The verses that stand out to me are verses 4, 5, and 6. Does he not see my way and all my steps count? Have I walked in a lie? Has my foot hurried to deceit? Let him weigh me on fair scales, that God know my blamelessness. And here comes the introduction to the discovery that we hinted at earlier. He's discovering, and this is going to blow a lot of people away, and I'm going to lose a lot of my Christian audience.
Uh-oh.
Discovering that righteousness does not equal or bring meaning, value, worth, or ontological gravity. Righteousness is important, and it's something that God requires, but that righteousness does not bring about relationship. That righteousness is not a guaranteed ticket to God's pleasure with you. That righteousness is not a guaranteed smile from God looking down favorably upon you. That righteousness is an element of relationship that you can be as righteous as you want. And if you haven't connected, guess what? You're not connected. And Job is starting to discover this. Look, we put everything on righteousness. You're a sinner, so you are separate from God. If only you could be made right. This is Luther's whole thing. If you could stand before God justified. Nope, that's part of it. You need to be in relationship with God. Standing before God justified is just a narcissist standing without culpability. Standing before God justified and in relationship, therein lies meaning. Verse 15, why my maker made him in the belly and formed him in self-same womb. So I should have given more context before I read this. Job is talking about like the people surrounding him, his slaves, and he comes to this conclusion that if a slave were to ask me, what's the point of this? I don't have an answer. At the end of the day, I don't know. I don't know why I crowned myself with party cool guy. I don't know why I crowned myself with essential royal guy. I don't know why we do. I don't know why I lord over you. I don't know why you just stay as my slave and obey. I don't know. I don't know what the point of is in continuing doing it. So maybe I ought to opt out. Another really interesting verse that I need to point out, and I'm not claiming that the author had knowledge of this or that Job had knowledge of this, but I think that God choreographs the Bible to have this crazy cool cohesion. I brought you guys to Genesis 1-3 to start with on purpose, because therein lies the foundation for the rest of the thought system throughout Scripture. In verse 33, Job says, "Did I hide like Adam and wrongdoings to bury within me my crime?" Remember when Adam hid? He saw his nakedness and he hid. If you remember back to what I presented in for chapters 1-3 in Genesis, one of the big important themes is that through transgression, Eve was able to create she was able to secure personhood for humanity. And part of that is, while she was active in that role, Adam was characterized as passive through the whole thing. If it were up to Adam, we would not have come into ontological becoming. And he's like, but I'm not Adam. I'm not hiding. I'm willing now to become. Now, maybe Job didn't understand that. And maybe the writer of Job did not understand that. But God, as the author, understood this, and he's giving us an Easter egg here. This next part is about becoming and not hiding and trying to escape the becoming. And then starting with verse 35, Job gets to this place where he can say something like, and again, these are my notes, I'm not going to quote the text, "I'm willing to take God's label of me," his characterization of me as my identity. Now I'll read the text. "Would that I had someone to hear me out. Here's my mark. Let Shaddai," or most of the English translations say let God, "answer me, and let my accuser indict his writ. I would bear it upon my shoulder, bind it as a crown upon me." So here's the thing. How God characterizes me, maybe that's who I am. And this section ends by saying, "Here end the words of Job." And that takes us through chapter 31. Next week, we'll be at a new section. What say y'all?
I think it sounds great.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely had some thoughts that I didn't want to say because I feel like it'd derail you. But kind of going all the way back to, I think it was like 24 or 23. But you're talking about being, having fear for God, being humbled before God. And I think just kind of like this thought was just working throughout everything else you were going over. But just like, I mean, the image that kind of conjures up what you were describing to me is like a giant wave in the ocean towering over, a boat, and just being at the mercy of Mother Nature. And just, in a way, like, I think that's kind of what's appealed to me to, engage in these conversations and everything, is almost like a language thing of like a lot of people who I would like, point to as having more wisdom than some other people in my life would, described things as like, oh, the universe or something like that. And, it got me open to just being like, well, hey, if you just use the term God for what I understand as like the thing I'm incapable of knowing, then it's able to really like click for me, and a lot of stuff starts making sense. But is that kind of what you're getting at with like, you're going to lose a lot of Christians with this or something? Would be that, maybe the aging hippie who's humbled himself before nature and everything and just, gives it up and stops trying to control everything, and just, is that guy got more wisdom than, the most righteous, just toe the line kind of Bible thumper?
I mean, maybe so, but I think my point, I see where you're going with that. I hadn't thought of that when I was making my point. Where I was going is, for most Christians, and a lot of people who are hearing me are going to start with Christianity as baseline, and that's not where you're starting. But most Christians think of Christianity and think of salvation. They think of salvation as everything. And I'm not saying it's not important, and I'm not saying it isn't there, but I'm saying, like, let's say you're saved. Now what? See, like, being saved isn't everything, and being justified isn't everything, and being righteous isn't everything. But most of like the Torah believing Jews throughout the centuries, like, were trying to be right before God in some way or another. And for most of Christian history, the premium is put on, how do I get God pleased with me? How do I get clean? How do I get him so that he doesn't detest me? And so we come up with all of these extravagant formulas about how Jesus is sacrificed like a lamb so that God can be appeased and he's not disgusted when I'm in his presence. First of all, that's off. It's not God disgusted with me and he can't tolerate me in his presence while I am lacking and inadequate. It's that I will implode, I will explode or something. I can't survive, like the way I can't survive in space without some kind of covering, without some kind of protection. I cannot thrive in space. I am too inadequate to thrive in that environment. And in the perfectness of God, I cannot thrive in his presence. I am inadequate. It's not because I am wrought with sin and disgusting. It's that I am mortal and he is divine. I am not divine. I can't exist in his presence unless there's some kind of a fix. It'll turn out that Jesus is that fix. But we are consumed with, we are obsessed with getting to a place where I'm righteous, where I'm free from sin, where I'm not culpable, where I'm not guilty. That's a piece of the whole picture.
So,
you know what the most important part is? That I'm in relationship with God. It turns out that I can't be in relationship until the fix is appropriated correctly. But the fix isn't the end of the story. The fix is the bridge to my relationship. And the part where I'm going to miss Christians is they can't conceptualize past the fix.
yeah. So your hippie has figured out to sort of bloom where he's planted, right? That it doesn't matter what his circumstances are, or if he's rich or if he's poor. He's worked through all of these sort of Jovian issues. And he knows that his job after he gets right with God is to do the best he can to share Jesus's love wherever he ends up. And so he looks a lot less like a control freak, right? Where sort of the rest of Christians, they are obsessing about checking the boxes, right?
Yeah.
So if I do these 10 things, then I'm like on the short list for sitting at God's right hand at the end of days or something crazy, right? And they don't have any vision for what life looks like as a Christian in the world.
And that's a big point. Like, so much of what Jesus is saying in the gospel is, I'm here to establish my kingdom. And I'm here to tell you what it's like to live in community with principles of love, instead of being hung up with the law or being hung up with like punitive thoughts. Is God ever punitive? Yes, under certain conditions. Is that the point of everything? No. I'm here to show you how to live life, not just exist, not just get by. And I'm here to tell you that it's not based on what you have or don't have. And I'm here to tell you that it's not based on nutrition. It's not based on shelter. It's not based on how much your government is just or unjust or benevolent or not, or controlling or totalitarian. Like, it would be good and luxurious, and it's in your best interest for there to be maximum freedom from your government or within your governmental system. But where it lands on that scale of freedom is inconsequential. Your citizenry to the kingdom transcends that. I am going to teach you, basically, Jesus says, how to live together under the principle of love, regardless of your facticity, regardless of your circumstance. Paul says something like, I've had a lot and I've had nothing. And like, it's all about learning how to be content either way. Or stated differently, like, your facticity is not indicative of or what constitutes the condition of your thriving. That is done by kingdom living. And that's the radical idea that Jesus brings into place. There has to be a way to live with meaning in relationship with God and the people around you and creation that is more than the empty ideas that these lame guys bring before Job. And that is more than being saved. There's got to be a way to live as a slave. There's got to be a way to live as a have, as a privileged. There's got to be a way to live as somebody under a totalitarian regime, somebody who's been oppressed, somebody who's been victimized, somebody who's done the victimization. At some point, after the fix, we can all come together and live in unity and harmony under principle, regardless of facticity. And that is kingdom living. And that's what Jesus is driving towards. It's not enough to be righteous. You have to be in relationship. And therein lies meaning.
Can I ask a little further? I know we're kind of going pretty long.
I have to duck out, guys.
Yeah.
Bye,
All right.
Lynn.
I just want to say goodnight because bedtime's in 15 minutes for me.
Good night, Lynn.
Middle school comes early.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So yeah, I guess and again, this is all like the whole, like just with everything going on and COVID and all the politics and stuff, I see so much of, and I'm guilty of, like people just being filled with like righteous anger or something and just being like, it's totally fascist or whatever, like whatever angle you're taking at it. And it just feels like that's entirely unproductive and even like totally counterproductive, and really is what is creating the situation we're in, just like giving in to the fear and anger and everything like that. So I get the whole basing it on love and basing it on something more meaningful than that, than just like, oh, I need my government to be, just, makes a lot of sense to me. And I've also heard you talk on this and, heard you talk about God, and you clearly love God. I've seen you tear up.
That's the biggest compliment ever, man.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, I can tell, and it's and I would like to say I love God, but it's I don't love God like I love my wife. I know my wife, I know, her character traits that just, fill me with joy. And I just love her. And I don't think I could say the same for God in in a relationship sense. So I'm just wondering how you think, like when you're talking about, having a relationship with God, like how, I don't know. I guess I don't have a solid question.
I almost hear and detect a sense of guilt that you don't love God more, or don't have the capacity to love him, or some kind of misconceived idea like this.
Mm-hmm.
And I will quote some of Jesus' words in just a second. First, let me tell you that you're not expected to love somebody that you don't know. And God isn't offended that you don't love him. He might be hurt that you don't know him. He might be hurt further that you haven't worked hard to get to know him, like just theoretically, right? I'm not putting that on your shoulders.
Yeah.
But Jesus says something. He says, come, taste, eat of me, and know that I'm good. You got to partake, and then you're going to be hooked, and then you'll be in love.
I guess that's how it happened with my wife too. So yeah, well, thanks. Good answer.
Anything else, Maggie, before we go?
No, I think that at the end when you tied it all together with that, it's none of it is worth it if you're out of relationship. So it doesn't matter if you do all this good, you sacrifice and do all of this. If you are not in relationship with God, it is moot. It's for naught.
And with that, let's say good night to Facebook, my friends.
Good night.
Bye, everybody.